We're moving next into the kind of exploration of some of these as Ulanowitz calls, agonistic principles that pull in different directions and kind of call out for a needed synthesis, like resilience and efficiency in the window of vitality model. We have kind of the first deep dive we're going to do is this kind of problem we have with in development work between learning and accountability. So our donors are requiring us to kind of do more with less and more quicker and faster, and which often undermines the very premise of trying to learn and adapt and kind of figure things out as we go along. So our first deep dive will be moderated by Melissa Patsalides. She is the acting director in USAID's Office of Learning and Evaluation. And she joined the team in 2011, and she's been working with complexity-aware approaches to monitoring and evaluation. So, Melissa, can you and a whole discussant team, which I can't go into, but they'll introduce themselves as we go along. Thank you. Oh, one more thing. I'd like to call attention to Cameron Robinson, who's working on some creative whiteboarding of some of the ideas that are kind of coming out of both the talks and the discussion. And I must also say that please tweet and use our board in the back to put more ideas on and to share ideas with others. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So as we have heard really throughout the morning, and I think as we all know and feel because we're all gathered here together, the need for adaptive learning and adaptive management is imperative for actors in international development. And this is really being recognized, I think, a lot more broadly now in the past few years. I think folks in other fields maybe knew this all along. Donors, unfortunately, had maybe a different paradigm starting out, but now we do have a bit of a shifting in the center of gravity. And this really brings into relief the tension between learning and accountability. And I inhabit this every day, and that's the focus of this panel. So we'll be really interested to hear some specific examples from folks who are out there struggling with this every day. I could speak for USAID, but I think donors in general we have this reputation for having overly focused on accountability and for having missed the forest for the trees. We love to count trees. We don't necessarily understand the contours of the forest with the systems that we've brought to bear to our work. But that really has started to shift. And I work in the Central Policy Bureau, and the office that's charged with our policy and our guidance for monitoring and evaluation. So I feel really good about this change happening. But I also know that we're a big bureaucracy, and when I think of the conversation this morning, just kind of made my mind hurt to think about the varied actors in the international development space, and it's really not even donors anymore. There are lots of other entities, social impact, collective impact funds, and so many other actors now that are playing in this space. And thinking about harnessing that group and kind of moving generally in the same direction at the same time. That's going to take a while, but that's okay because there are some tangible things happening now that give me hope and that make me willing to continue to come and inhabit that tension between learning and accountability every day. There is a change in conversations. I see a nascent willingness to talk about learning from unsuccesses. We don't necessarily have to call them failures, but Wayan's going to talk to you a little bit more about that. There's willingness to own up to that. There's a nascent understanding. I'm talking now about USAID. I think the crowd in the room is beyond nascent at this point. Understanding of systems thinking and complexity and what that brings to bear on our work and how that requires a shifting in not only thinking but practice. And more specifically, even from our office and where we sit, we have a set of tools and practices and approaches to doing this work, and Piers is going to talk to you a little bit more about that, collaborating, learning, and adapting. And we are, trying to press the space and hold open a little bit more space for learning, for failing, for adapting. But we know that we have a role to play in doing that and maintaining some space and not letting all of the air in the container be filled by the accountability gas, but to try to have some space for the learning gas. So we actually sponsor some trials. As Paul mentioned, we're looking for additional approaches to add to our toolkit for monitoring and evaluation that are a little bit more aware of the complexity and the uncertainty in our space. There are others in the agency. The Global Development Lab is sponsoring some new work streams in this area through different ways of bringing innovation to the monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning space. And we are just trying to kind of slowly move together, just in a general direction of change. And I think that that's a really positive thing. So if folks are willing to work with us and help pressure us from the outside, that's a great thing. We need that. We're going to keep working from the inside to try to change the rhetoric, change the dialogue, and change the mindset to get to a changed practice. And that's actually all I have to say. So with that, I will hand it over to Mike. I think you're first.
Okay, I'm Mike Ferguson, Director of the Aspires Project here at FHI, part of the department that put this conference together. And very much in the spirit of learning and accountability, my presentation is called A Tale of Two Research Projects, Process Evaluation versus Impact Evaluation. So I'd like you to imagine a hypothetical economic strengthening program focusing on vulnerable populations, offering a few different kinds of training, financial literacy, entrepreneurship. It's a 5-year project, multiple cohorts rolled out on a staggered basis across those 5 years. There's a strong argument that a project like this very much needs a process evaluation, which might come around here in the life of the project. End of year 2, the process is well underway, perhaps into its second cohort. You can really get a sense of how it's operating. So what does a process evaluation do? Well, it can answer some really key questions on the operational side of the project. Is the technical content being delivered effectively? Is the content appropriate to context? What can be done to improve the program? That last one is a key one because since we're doing it here at the end of year 2, those results can feed back into the program and help improve it, correct the course, as it were. Learn from those mistakes. It's learning that gets put to use right away to improve the program as an immediate input to the program system. In terms of the nuts and bolts of process evaluations, a few sort of hallmarks of them. You're generally talking about a single measurement, single point in time. The supply side focus, as I said, focusing on the operations. Usually qualitative methods, usually quick turnaround, usually relatively cheap. However, they still require rigor to do well, proper qualitative methods and proper analytical techniques with the qualitative data generated from that. So now I'd like you to imagine the same program, but now we're thinking more about impact and impact evaluation. Beyond is the program operating effectively, is it actually changing lives in the expected way? Unlike process evaluations, with impact evaluations, you're usually talking about multiple measurements or observations over time to capture change over time. Ideally, you'd have a baseline and multiple end lines to capture sort of both medium and longer term effects. So what does an impact evaluation tell us as compared to a process evaluation? Again, is the program changing lives? Where are the changes most significant? Are the observed impacts consistent with the program's theory of change? Okay, you're seeing change, but is the change that they predicted would happen with this intervention. And finally, maybe most important of all, is the program worthy of replication? On the on the methodological side, again, usually we're talking about multiple measurements with an impact evaluation because you're capturing change over time, and long intervals between them. You look at the layout and the timeline here. You got baseline, end line 1 at year 3, end line 2 at year 4. You might not get results until around here. And of course, what does that mean? That means that this project is going to be of almost no use to correct or improve the program that it's evaluating. You're talking about, an end-line effect. Did the project achieve what it intended to achieve? But these results are not going to feed back into the project itself while it's in progress, as opposed to a process evaluation. Other methodological hallmarks, usually talking about big samples with treatment and counterfactual. Generally, quantitative survey-based techniques are the most common and widely accepted methods for impact evaluation. Complex statistical manipulations, big resources, big money. In other words, real impact evaluation is serious business. They require extensively trained experts, lots of time, and quite a bit of money in most cases. So, you might be asking yourself, what's the right kind of impact evaluation? What's the right kind of evaluation for me? Answer, that's a stupid question. You'll do both kinds and like it. It's actually not a choice that makes a whole lot of sense, as you may have gathered from the earlier slides, because the two core questions here are so vastly different. One is, are we on the right track? The other is the program working? Ultimately, a process evaluation is a fairly narrow view on the operations of a particular program. It can be used to fix the program while in progress, and that's probably the biggest and most important aspect of it. An impact evaluation is a broader view on the long-term effects of a program and whether it's worthy of replication. The relevance can go way beyond the particular program and can help guide a whole area of practice. Each has its place. All programs should strive to do both. You're probably going to run into funders that don't want you to don't want to fund both. My advice to you is fight it. Fight it like your project depends on it, because it does. I got a few more notes here, but my time's up, so I'm gonna cut it off right there. Thank you very much.
It's rare that I actually need a microphone, but I'm usually loud enough. So I'm up here to talk to you today about failure. Failure, yes, I said it. The F word in development. We never talk about failure. We never speak about failure. I know you're giggling because he's even saying it on stage. Because for us, we don't like to talk about failure. What we're doing innovation. We talk about being innovative innovators, innovating innovation. But we never say our innovation failed. I've read many project reports, and I know you've read many proposals and project reports, and never do they write in there, yeah, we tried that and we failed. Everybody writes, oh, we're innovative and we did some innovation, or we learned lessons, or I like this new one, we had unsuccesses. And so I believe that failure is tied to innovation, and I think we should accept it. In fact, and I'm really disappointed we don't talk about it. In fact, raise your hands if you feel that you've ever failed in a development project. Raise your hand high. Raise your hand high. So a good majority of the room, but still some people had their hands down. Liars. And why is that? Well, first, are we working on easy problems? No, we're working on some of the most intractable problems known to man that no one has solved in thousands of years, right? We're also working in places that we call them failed states, right? And at the same time, we're introducing change. Change by definition is really risky. And yet, here we are, we had people today who kept their hands down. Who said, no, I've never failed. I don't fail, right? We have this inherent fear. But if we go look at Silicon Valley and we talk to them, and that's arguably one of the best places to make money in America, people in Silicon Valley, every single VC will say, yes, I've failed. Every single startup person will say, yes, I failed many times, right? It's a mark of badge. It's a badge of honor. The VCs are interesting, venture capitalists. They expect 9 of their 10 investments to fail. They expect a 90% failure rate. And they are working in an easy business environment. Here we are working in failed states, and we get shivers and having to actually say the word failure even once, right? Which is insane. And at the same token, I think part of it is because when we hear the word failure, we think massive, massive failure. We think Fukushima. We think the Hindenburg. We think of just where people die and it's horrible. But failure has different spectrums. There's the simple failure of, honey, I'm sorry, I forgot the milk. Yeah, I'll go get some. There is failure where we say we're going to reach 1,000 people, but we only reach 500. And yes, in the absolute, that is a failure. In the relative, there is success. And also, there's planned failure. When we do something for the first time, we call it a test. We call it an alpha, right? A pilot. And we see if it works. And if it doesn't, we change it a little bit and we do it again. We call it a beta. We've all dealt with beta software. Every product that we have that's a consumer or business product, we expect it to go through iterations and improve over time, right? And then it's never truly perfect. That there's this concept of Kaizen. We always have to improve. And yet in our development projects, we've never failed, right? Which to me is just really strange. If you look in the business world, YouTube, that was supposed to be a dating site. Arguably now one of the best places on video, and I did not find my wife on YouTube. I found her on Match. True story. And in the same concept, SMS, text messages, SMS was supposed to be machine-to-machine communication. It was never meant for a human to read a text message. Operators make millions on SMSs. Viagra. Viagra was originally designed to try to reduce heart attacks. It didn't do that so well, but wow, that side effect. So in that sense, there is success that comes from failure, and there's innovation. We celebrate this innovation that is and requires failure along with it. But then we come to our own industry, and I think we have to change it, because I think what we do is insane. I think simple change is to have a before action report, not just an after action report. And to understand that we're going to have multiple successes or influences, and there'll be a range of success and influence, right? That you hit 500, that could be a success, versus always thinking you have to hit 1,000. But I think our ultimate insanity that we have to change is this concept that when we write a proposal, 30 to 60 days, almost always over a holiday, that somehow that this is going to be something that we should be legally bound to for the next 3 to 5 years. And that any change in that prescripted to the dollar, activity described to the nth degree, any change in that is a failure, right? That's insane. Imagine going home and telling your spouse and your children, we're going to set up a project plan for our household over the next 5 years. We're going to do it over the weekend. Monday morning, we're going to sign it. Any deviation from this will be a failure. Any deviation from these expected outcomes, failure, right? Your family would look at you as if you're insane. And yet we come to work every day and we practice that insanity. So I think we really have to change. We have to make a space for innovation, which requires a space for failure, right? And we have to plan for it. We have to expect it. To an extent, we have to celebrate failure. Because I believe that is a true mark of innovation. It's a mark of success. It's a mark of how we're actually going to have programs scale from pilots to global changing programs. And in that, my challenge to you today is actually use the word failure. To say it out loud. Failure. You can do it. Come on, with me. Say it out loud. Failure. Yes, you just admitted the F word in development. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayan. I'm not afraid to admit that I failed to memorize what I'm going to say today, so. While we wait for my brief slides to come up, let me introduce myself. My name is Piers Bocock. I have the good fortune to be the Chief of Party for the USAID Learn contract. And we support the Office of Learning, Evaluation, and Research in USAID's Bureau for Policy, Planning, and Learning. And you guys may not know this, but we have been given a very, very hard challenge. We've been told we're given 5 minutes, and that is it, to get across an idea, not to talk about projects, and to sort of spur potential conversation. So we'll see. Let's see if I can do that. And my job today is to talk about adaptive management and tools to support it. So, adaptive management. There's been some really, really interesting conversations this morning talking about ecosystems and systems thinking. As Wayan said, there's this tendency, or there has been a tendency in projects to write a proposal, design a work plan, and stick to it no matter what. But we don't live in a linear world. We don't operate in linear environments. We operate in complex environments with multiple stakeholders, and we need to be able to adjust for that. But that's not easy. It's much easier said than done. Our contracting mechanisms in international development don't usually allow it. So there's got to be this change. And Melissa started talking about how USAID is starting to recognize that and starting to change the way we do things. I heard a really interesting analogy the other day. Rachel Kleinfeld from the Carnegie Institute talked about planning for sailboats, not trains. Recognizing that the journey we need to take, we may know where the destination is, but it's not going to be a straight line. And once we start accepting that and building it into our programs from the get-go, we have a shot. So, adaptive management. Basically, the way we look at it is a flexible and intentional iterative approach to program design and management that recognizes and accepts the inherent complexity of the environments in which we work. So it builds flexibility into program design and management from the get-go, making space for ongoing and intentional measuring, assessing, learning, and when appropriate, adapting. For USAID, that means building that intentionally into its RFPs, into its contracts, and into its program plans. Learn, on our contract, we actually operate on 6-month work plans so that we can stop, we can assess, we can look, and we can adapt if necessary. And of course, from USAID's perspective, we have to acknowledge that multi-year plans are required. But if we also make it okay that if things don't work, we can adapt, then we actually have a better chance of serving those we want to serve. Because we're not doing anybody any favors if we just stick to our plan and the people we're trying to serve don't actually get what they need. In terms of tools and resources, I have to make a shameless plug for USAID Learning Lab, which is a site that some of you may know and Learn manages. It has a lot of great resources on there about collaborating, learning, and adapting, which is the approach that we put into practice and how that can support strategic learning and adaptive management. And I was told to talk about tools and methods, and it's important to note that, yes, we do before-action reviews and after-action reviews and midterm reviews and portfolio reviews. And this isn't new, of course. What's new in the philosophy and the approach that USAID is trying to take in its guidance is to make it intentional, systematic, and resourced. How can you expect to create a learning environment if you don't have people who are dedicated to it or if it's built into your job description? But as with all of these things, you can have all the tools in the world, but it's not about the tools. They can help us get there. We can be intentional about it, but we also believe that you have got to have that leadership in place that supports the intentionality of adaptive management, that puts in place the systematic processes that support adaptive management, and that dedicates resources to it. So, want to know more? USAIDlearninglab.org. Reach out to me or ask us some questions in the break. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Is this working?
It'll be in a second. Wait till it gets back to this.
Is it working? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Doty. I'm a technical advisor here at FHI 360, and I want to talk to you about real-world challenges in implementing CLA, in particularly the case of the Uganda Community Connectors program. Collaborating, learning, and adapting. So I'm going to quickly introduce to you the program. The Uganda Community Connectors program is a Feed the Future program. It works across sectors to address poverty, food insecurity, and undernutrition. It works in 15 districts in the northern and southwestern areas of Uganda, some of the most remote and difficult areas to reach. And the project has employed CLA and adaptive management principles throughout the life of the project. So how does it do CLA? To begin with, CLA is integrated into the design of the program. To complement this, it brings in knowledge-driven systems and fosters an enabling environment through an organizational culture that leads to a very collaborative process. So what does this design look like? It's a modular approach. The CC project was designed in 3 separate phases: the pilot phase, the scale-up phase, and the impact phase. Each of these phases has 2 modules, a learning module and an implementation module. During each learning module, the project conducts comprehensive analyses and examines the key determinants of undernutrition, food security, and poverty. The information from these analyses is shared with all of the stakeholders who collaborate to design interventions and adaptations to the project. Adaptations might include revised scopes of work, adjustments to strategies, or refined work plans. A few other elements that are critical to the success of a CLA program are knowledge-driven systems, relying on technology such as GIS mapping and mobile phones, organizational culture. The CC project challenges partners and staff to continuously learn and actively supports them in doing so. They welcome scrutiny from all the partners and from USAID. And finally, it depends on commitment and buy-in from both the project leadership and from USAID. So what are the challenges in implementing CLA under the Community Connector program? First of all, CLA is time-consuming. It emphasizes collaborative learning. It creates space and time for internal and external stakeholders to participate in project learning and to problem solve together. This takes time. It requires the flexibility to accept project delays and implementation delays. CLA is expensive. Conducting these analyses, they're usually large-scale assessments. They're conducted during each learning module, and it's expensive. Change is difficult. Any necessary program occurs through regular and ad hoc refinement of partner scopes of work, technical strategy design, staff job descriptions. This is very difficult to get everybody on board. What about targets and results? Oftentimes, the learning questions are somewhat qualitative. They're somewhat general. For example, one of the learning questions that we focused on recently was, what characteristics make for a successful agricultural service provider? But yet, there's no definition of what success is. This tends to risk driving the focus off track, away from your overall targets and results. And finally, in an increasingly competitive environment in the field of development, highlighting our failures is very difficult to do, and many implementers are unwilling to do so, particularly when you're coming up to a project follow-on and a competitive procurement process. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have some questions and answer time, and I'm going to kick it off with something actually, a question that I have was triggered even more troubling thoughts for me from Otto's conversation this morning, which was, well, he talked about greed, fear, and ignorance kind of being barriers to people moving to a more systemic level of thinking and engagement. And certainly within USAID, we observe, from my perch, that one of the challenges for adaptation is either just user inexperience and people feeling a lack of confidence that they have either the ability or the information they need to adapt, and they struggle with knowing when and how to adapt. So I'd love to hear from a couple of the panelists examples you've seen of helping people get to that point to know when and how to adapt based on the information they have available. Who would like to field that one? Piers is jotting some things down. We might give him a chance to continue to jot.
Thanks. Is this on? Okay. So I'm not going to comment on the youth within the ranks of USAID.
But I can, that's okay.
But I will talk a little bit about the environment that we have tried to create on our own project. Okay? So the Learn contract is designed to support adaptive management. It is supposed to be helping to scale up collaborating, learning, and adapting, or CLA, as you heard the term. We want to walk the talk. So we go out there promoting this, and we want to do it on ourselves. We have a lot of really talented young people, and what we're trying to do is create a culture in which they are not afraid to say, hey, here's what I'm noticing. Could we try something different? And for us, we find that that sort of open culture, supported by leadership, at least gives us an opportunity to create space to test stuff out. Maybe it won't work, but maybe it will. And maybe we can then suggest that to our partners at USAID as ways to move forward.
Anybody else want to take that on?
So here at FHI 360, we actually have some, I think, very interesting ways where we give people space to innovate. And we have something called Catalyst Awards, and we give out 5 Catalyst Awards so far every year. And people are, the expectation is that these aren't always going to be amazing successes, and it's going to be an opportunity for us to challenge, do something new. And the idea is it's, if you will, each award is small enough where it gives us space to experiment in a safe spot. And in this case, it's actually amazing to see people bloom and come forward with really wild and crazy ideas, because in this process, it's not seen as a negative to actually go out and suggest something that in an ordinary proposal or ordinary project would seem crazy. So in that sense, I really love that opening there for innovation.
I was just wondering, you're talking about processes like CLA, which is sort of the more complex version of the process evaluation I was talking about. Process evaluation is sort of the simpler single point in time type corrections. Yours is more an ongoing iterative type thing. But do you or have you run into problems on the impact evaluation side of these projects? Which is to say, there are evaluators who've come in and done a baseline, and they've set up to evaluate a particular program in a particular way. And they don't want to see it radically overhauled in the middle of the project, because they will see that as detrimental to measuring the impact that they have set out to measure. That was actually one of the final points that I skipped over, is sort of there is some inherent tension between course correction, CLA, process evaluation, whatever you want to call it, and impact evaluation. I mean, have you encountered that?
Well, first, the Learn contract itself has only been around for just short of a year. But in talking with LER and PPL, there is a tension between monitoring and evaluation and learning. And people sometimes still talk very much as monitoring and evaluation and learning, without recognizing that monitoring serves learning. It's not just the accountability piece, it's also for learning to adapt. I would rather have Melissa talk a little bit about the tension that perhaps she's seen around evaluation.
Sure, I could just briefly, before throwing it out to you all to questions, just note we've had a lot of misunderstanding within the agency when our agency released a new evaluation policy almost 5 years ago now, and actually asked for impact evaluations, by which we define as using experimental or quasi-experimental methods. So it's actually an attempt to delineate cause and effect. It's much more of a research orientation for does this cause that, rather than what is the overall effect. So our stance to help coach staff through that, to making the right decisions about what to use to answer their questions, has been to focus on what they need to know and whether they need to understand, did X and Y cause Z, or do they just really want to understand something else, something broader, the overall effect, or are they actually doing something where they don't know what causes what, and therefore they need a much more iterative and adaptive approach to implementation and measurement, and therefore shouldn't be looking or even thinking about experimental or quasi-experimental designs and control or comparison groups, because that's inappropriate. So we think there are places where that's the right way to try to implement and work, but then probably more likely 90% of our sphere of development intervention is much more iterative and adaptive and not sure what cause and effect necessarily are, in spite of the mythologies that we tell ourselves about, oh, supply chain is the way to go in this field, and maybe that's not actually the case. So we have to have a bit more resourced and thoughtful approach to figuring that out and measuring as we need. So let's kick it out to the audience and see what questions you have. First here.
Thank you all. Great talks. I wanted to offer something up for us to also include in consideration. 10 years ago, I had the privilege of heading up the largest ethnographic study ever done on learning at work, informal learning, the stuff that happens